Hey, will you put me on hold for a minute so I can listen to our old music?
Yep.
We're at your front door.
All right, folks, welcome back to Into the Lion's Den. You got our hosts here, Mr. Ryan Karras and Christian Griffith, sponsored by Pride Roofing and Construction. Today, huge shout out. It's Big Man's birthday, 35 years old. So,
Downward slope.
Yeah. No, it's a great birthday, in my opinion, because this is when, the elder population actually take you seriously when you're above 35. So I guess here you go, buddy. You're a real man now. So.
I had a mentor tell me one time that every decision you make before 35, don't trust it. It's kind of accurate.
I'm living inside of my choices.
Yeah.
35 is like, oh man, I'm gonna have a midlife crisis. So,
Well, quick shout out to Christian, whose birthday is tomorrow.
yeah. Fun fact: we're born in the same state, one day apart,
You know what time you were born?
50 miles away.
Yeah.
I think I cannot remember. I think
No?
it was around 8 p.m., something like that. So,
Wild.
yes.
We're almost exactly 24 hours apart because mine was like 6. I think it was like 6:15 p.m.
Yeah, we're both daywalking gingies.
Yeah.
No blood relation. All right, we'll get to the actual show. Today we're going to be spinning off from the first episode, which was talking about fatal error number 1 and 2. So I'm going to reference the book one more time. 13 Fatal Errors Managers Can Make and How Not to Make Them by, what is it? W. Stephen
W.
Brown?
Stephen
I
Brown.
wonder what the W is for.
Walter.
Willis.
Yeah.
All right. But anyways, last week we talked about failure to take or accept personal accountability. What was the second one? Failure to develop people.
Yep.
Today we're going to be talking about number 3 and 4, which is trying to control results instead of influence thinking. And then the fourth one is joining the wrong crowd. So I'm going to let you take it away, birthday boy.
And just raised my eyebrows at join the wrong crowd because I did a lot of that in my adolescence. Yeah, I think if we talk on point 1, trying to control results instead of influence thinking, it just reminds me of the consultant that we had in here, and his coined term of adult learning,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Shout out to Kevin.
It's always a little bit of a reality check and a little bit of comical relief when we bring it up in here. Is like, what form of adult learning were you using there? Which really, adult learning kind of comes down to understanding the right questions to ask and how to ask them to influence productivity out of people, right? Or ownership, right? But I think that, in this book, a lot of when I think of trying to control results instead of influence thinking, I think of a lot of micromanaging, right? When you micromanage somebody, you eliminate their ability to think for themselves. You kind of box them into, this is what your job is. Only this is to produce X, Y, and Z. Anything outside of that, don't worry about. I don't want you to think for yourself. I don't want you to be creative. This is the only thing you're supposed to do, right? Which I think drastically inhibits growth in general, but I think that it also drastically demotivates somebody, right? Especially if they're a results-oriented person and they hit those results and then they hit a ceiling, right? Or they hit a perceived ceiling because, then you do that same thing day in and day out for, I don't know, for some people it's a week, for some people it's a year, and there's no growth, right?
Right.
Stagnation always demotivates people at some time, some people sooner than later, but the talking points I have on here is that it promotes dependency over autonomy, undermines learning and adaptability, limits perspective and creativity, and creates short-term focus. But I think that a lot of what I see here in what I've seen in managers in the past is that they try to control things out of insecurity, right? Of either their confidence in their team, or they think that they're the only person that knows the answer and they can do it better than anybody else.
Seen that.
Right. So, one of the, my favorite things to ask anybody under me when they come and ask me a question is, well, what do you think?
Right.
Right. Well, what's your perspective on this? Right.
To answer a question with a question.
Right.
Get some Aristotle in the room.
Yeah. I mean, it's
No, wait, that's Socrates.
yeah, Socrates. Yeah. But I think that, by asking questions, you can lead them to their own answer, right? Without having to give them the answer. And then that gives them the ability to learn at the same time. And more often than not, they're like, oh, I could have come up with that. I'm like, right, exactly.
Yeah, well, at least to somebody who uses critical thinking well before they come seeking answers.
Right.
Right, which is a powerful thing to have on your team.
Yeah.
Can you, to the best of your ability, break down what adult learning actually is, or give an example?
To the best of my ability, I think that in its most simplistic form, in a couple sentences, I think that it's not giving the answer and or solution, and trying to encourage critical thinking by asking questions to get the person to that answer, more or less guiding them.
Yep. You're definitely like rearing people, right? So they don't get too far out of
leading a horse to water.
Exactly. But it's, instead of providing answers, it's encouraging critical thinking,
Right.
Or encouraging just thinking in general.
Right.
You're not always critical.
Yeah.
Sometimes people ask you tough questions.
And my favorite response to a question being answered with a question is, why can't you just give me the answer?
Let me ask you a question so I can ask a question for a question back. Yeah. No, I mean, there is a little bit of a through line, so I guess I'm giving a little bit of a prompt forward in the discussion, but there's a through line with both of these failures, which is that trying to control results rather than influence thinking, like you said, it sort of minimizes somebody's urge to grow within an organization. And joining the wrong crowd as a manager also limits a manager's growth opportunity within that organization because they reach less people, so they have less influence over people. So there's a through line with both of these that I think is probably important to, I guess, acknowledge. Now, one of the things that I like the most about I had to do a little scanning before.
Yeah.
I hadn't read this book in a little while, but they give you a figure in there that's essentially this leads to this leads to this. Now, a manager who's trying to control results is going to stare at numbers all day long, and they're not going to give any form of understanding or question and response, or they're not going to try to understand what the actual action was of the person. So they're looking at data point A, data point B, and they're like, okay, that's who you are, right? So if data point A and data point B show you're on pace for what we're looking for, good job, right? And that happens, like you said, if it happens for a year, people then become stagnant because they're like, well, is there anything else that could come from this job? Is there really anywhere that I can go? This is boring, and they start to taper off. Whereas somebody who's failing in those categories is consistently knowing that they're failing, but they're not being given any guidance or any type of urge, like given any kind of like shove forward in how you can actually fix that.
Right.
It's like, let's look at your numbers, not good, and then you leave. Right? It's like, okay, why are they not good?
Yeah.
Why did, and it's as simple as, when we were talking in that one conversation about my time selling personal training, where we had to ask, before we ever tried to sell the product, we had to get to 3 or 4 layers of the why factor before we started actually asking anything. We had to do the same thing with our salespeople, if that's who we're managing, or whoever it is that's within our leg of business that we're managing. We have to find the why factor that produced the result, not just stare at the result. Because if we can't figure out what that is, then we have no there's no usefulness of us being a manager in that point,
Right.
in that position, or at that point in time. So, but the excuse me, the little figure that they show in the book, it says thought leads to action. Action leads to behavior. Behavior leads to habits. Habits lead to success or results, right? And if we're just talking about the results, we're never going to figure out what the actions nor what the thoughts were. And that's what we're talking about in this particular scenario, is reframing people's thought process towards their job.
Right.
Like, why are you doing this job in the first place? Why is it important for you to actually hit these data points? Learn more about the organization. And when they see that and they understand it, they can start to open up. Maybe they're going to talk about, maybe I'm not in the right seat on the bus. Maybe I should be transferred to another place where my strengths are going to actually work. Or maybe they can actually start painting on the canvas with you because they're like, oh, I get what we're doing here.
Right.
You know?
I think a lot of people, new managers or managers that are kind of, set in their ways, I think that they look at that drawing or that trajectory as thoughts become actions, actions become results.
Right.
And they skip, 2 to 3 steps.
Yeah.
Right. Where it's like you're missing the whole point of having somebody think autonomously. Right. So if we have, employee 1 says, oh, I have this thought, which produces this action, right? This action may or may not be beneficial towards that judging metric, right? But give me your thought behind that, right? Like, why do you think this action would be beneficial? Right? They're just like, okay, go. Right?
Right.
And then maybe that action doesn't produce the result they want. And then they're stuck, like, well, why did you encourage me to do that? If, this wasn't the result that we were going to get, and you may have known that, like, why wouldn't you coach me somewhere else?
Yep.
Right. Or maybe, think or talk a little bit deeper into my thought process of this action.
Right.
So
Right.
I think there's one of the things that I've always appreciated about you is that you've always thought and spoken very openly about, like, why do you think this person made this decision? Right. And then you look at it from a less or non-judgmental position, and you look at, like, it's like a discovery mission, right? Of like, well, I wonder why they did this.
Yeah.
I understand their perspective and I understand the company perspective, right? So I can't put 100% of the blame on them unless it was, obviously something ridiculous, like not showing up to work 13 days in a row, something like that, right?
Right.
But still, there's a big part of where I think a lot of managers, which I think all of these relate back to the first one of not taking personal accountability, right? Where they just say, this is your job, go do this, without giving much investment or thought into the people that they're barking those orders at.
But I think that the way that I look at it is it's our duty, like as a manager or as a leader within an organization, it's our duty to provide a stable foundation to be able to work off of.
Right.
Right. And if so, an error is made, I want to know whether it was because the foundation wasn't sturdy enough for them or not.
Right.
Right. Because if we're setting somebody up for failure, we should probably retract and go back to the actual origin of the problem. I had this conversation with a client, in the position I sit in with Pride Roofing,
Right.
I get all of the highest escalated issues.
Right.
Right. So like my day, 20% of my day on any given day is dealing with a problem.
Right.
Whereas there's not an exorbitant amount of problems happening all the time, but my world is fixing problems.
Yep.
Right. And so I was having this conversation with a client, and, I was listening to all of the different ins and outs of her job. And I said, no, please tell me more. She's like, I'm taking a lot of your time, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, please tell me more. Because when you say one of these things, I'm not just thinking about that scenario.
Right.
I'm thinking about the 3 things my representative probably failed on that led to this scenario.
Right.
If I can take that information back, then I don't have those holes
Right.
in the future. It's just a consistent learning lesson every time there's a problem. So actually, it's funny. We coined it's not coined. I guess we made it a no word in the organization to call it problems. We call them puzzles because puzzles are fun and challenging. And at the end of them, they're complete. But also, I think I missed one of the cues that you gave. I want to go back a little bit further with my response too. Is the micromanagement part? People who try to control results generally are up their employees' butts constantly about said results.
Right.
Right. They're not influencing the growth patterns like we've talked about, but you're kind of up their butts. No better way to say it. And they're starting to irritate everybody that works with underneath of them. Right. And I've made it kind of a joke response to most people, but this is how I truly feel as the owner of the organization. In a perfect world, what I would want is for everybody to show up, do their job, and go home. Right. In a perfect world, with no
Ripples.
no ripples, no after hours conversations, no dramatic, climactic crazy things that go on, no drama here, no clicks here, none of that nonsense. You show up. We have this operational agreement, right? It says what your requirements are, and then we've also set a roadmap for the things that are the requirements for whatever elevated job that you want from that point forward. And you go in and you tackle those things, you achieve them, and you move yourself forward. Right. But the only way to actually do that is to create autonomy. Right. The only way to create autonomy is by giving people the opportunity to discuss their thoughts and their actions and their habits, therefore their result.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I think a lot of people forget to realize that you also allow people to fail, and that's okay, right? Or make a small hiccup or make a small error, and it not be the end of the world, right?
Well, and allowing, it's just like with toddlers and the growth of a human. It's like you could hover around them your whole life and prevent them from falling ever. But if they never fall down, will they actually find any boundaries?
Right.
Will they ever actually know how to climb the stairs?
Right.
Or are we going to have to carry them up the stairs until you're too old and decrepit to take their 35-year-old ass up the stairs? Right. You know what I mean? Like it's just like life, and the only way to promote the growth of a child and somebody you're rearing to be, a positive influence in the world is by providing a support system, but making your boundary bigger and bigger between you and them, because you start to trust them more and they start to trust you more, that you're going to be there when the true fall actually happens.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. There is I don't know if you're familiar with this study. I don't have any reason to think you would even know about it, but there's a study that's done, and I'll preface this by saying this is not sexist. This is just the way that male and female brains are wired. But they took infants that could crawl, right? So, we'll say 6 months to a year old babies, right? And they put them on a mat, right? A soft surface. And they put their parent on the other side of the mat, and they put something in between them, right? Which was just like a foam gymnastics block, right? And the boys sat there and kind of looked at it, and then tried to crawl around it, couldn't crawl around it, tried to crawl over it, could crawl over it, but when they got to the top, they would stumble down the other side and then crawl to their other parent, right? Infant girls see the block get placed in between them and their parent, and they just sit and then cry, right?
It's interesting.
It's interesting, right? Yeah. And they did this with 1,000 babies, right? So they did it with 500 females and 500 males, and the results were almost the same everywhere, right? And it's like, but I look at that like the toddler reference of like, I'm what most people would maybe view as hard on my kid, right? But I look at it like the other day I walked outside and I saw her on this new electric scooter just eat it, right? She was trying to go down the curb. She fell. She didn't know I was outside, right? And I saw her pop back up, brush her knees off, and I heard her say, ow, right? And then get on her scooter and come back. And I was like, you good? And she was like, yeah, just a scrape. I was like, sweet. Now, there's another kid on my street that is hovered, right? And there's like any instance of instability, the mom is like, oh, no. Just careful, right? And she's got wrist pads, elbow pads, helmet, knee pads, right? And I'm like, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
You can fall off.
Some scratches.
Right. But you'll be okay. Right. And it's just funny, that dichotomy, because that's what I try to, I assimilate a lot of training, even adults, to the same thing as how raising kids are. Right.
Yeah.
Because they're learning, especially new people coming in the industry, they're learning a brand new skill. So you literally have to teach them like they know nothing.
Right.
Right.
Your job is to block the ends of the road.
Right.
Make sure no cars come.
Yeah, it's bowling bumpers.
Right. And actually I heard it was a pretty useful analogy that my pastor made a couple of weeks ago about the difference between the father's job and the mother's job when rearing children.
Yeah.
And they said that the mother's job, and this isn't to go like no sexism, just like in your statement or whatever, but it's like the mother's job is to nurture and to console and to consistently nourish and protect and whatever. That's their job, right? So if a child gets hurt, a mother is going to hold the child, and they're going to put their Band-Aids on the boo-boos, and they're going to do the things, right? And that can play out. So like if your child is going to go do an event and they're nervous about an event, they're going to hold them. Right. And then the father's job is essentially to nurture and do the other things, but then turn them around and show them how to do it the right way.
Right.
And let them know that they're going to be there for them to support them if they fall down. Right. So like, and I experienced this with my son when we were in wrestling tournaments and stuff like that. I had to have this conversation with my wife. It's like, we can't let him cry and sit here and not go on the mat. He's got to challenge himself in his mind. He's only 5, sure, but he's got to learn these things and build these neural pathways. So my job was to say, you know what, you got this, buddy. Go out there and have fun. I'm here for you. But then I had to turn him around, scoot him out to the mat. Right. So we got to do that as managers or leaders within business as well, which is like, we can't hover. Right. We can't control the results by being overbearing and that kind of stuff, because it's going to do the opposite. It's going to make them dependent upon you. It's going to make them not want to be around you at certain points when they're in a rebellious timeline, or maybe they don't want that and they want autonomy, so they go find it somewhere else.
Okay. So. Yeah, I had this exact situation happen today, right, where one of our newer guys was like, "Are you going to come up to the door with me and talk to the homeowner?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "How come?" I was like, "Because I've seen you do it about 15 times now, and you can do it. You'll be just fine." Right? And he came back and he was like, "That was better. It was easier than I thought." I was like, "Right, you're good." Right? So it's like, that intrinsic building of their self-esteem around that certain thing, their self-confidence. So what's your input on the second point, the joining the wrong crowd?
This one's interesting. So we probably have to look at it in 2 different scopes.
Internal, external?
Internal, external.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we've seen this play out in this organization before, the joining the wrong crowd. And what happens, the negative impact that happens when cliques develop, right? So everybody remembers like middle school. Or like, what's that movie? Mean Girls?
Mean Girls.
It's like, this is where the rich kids sit. This is where the goth chicks sit. Whatever. But anyways, what happens in a middle school? It's like the damn jungle, right?
It's brutal.
There's hatred. There's no cohesion. There's everybody is out for themselves,
right?
Unless you're in the clique, and then you watch out for your clique. But what happens in an organization is it's like a cumulative consensus of how we're going to operate. And that can be good in some senses. Maybe they're the ultra performers all are a clique and everybody wants to be like the ultra performers, but generally it's not that. It's a mixed bag. It's people from different departments, and all of a sudden, the common conversation is to expose the person that they all of a sudden don't like, or to naysay or talk shit about the organization because one thing happened to one of them that they don't understand, and now everybody feels the same empathetic response to it, or whatever it is. And so it's like, at best, you'll stay net neutral. Most of the time, it's going to be nothing but lack of productivity, lack of growth for each one of those people, lack of, just willingness to be a critical thinker and play for the team.
Bandwagoning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What is your... The external's tricky, right? Because there's a part of me that I don't think that an employee's life outside of work is my business unless it's affecting their professional life, right? But I have seen high performers very quickly disintegrate based on who they're surrounding themselves with outside of work.
There's not a lot of people in the world who can remain steadfast in their values and the way that they conduct themselves and their overall character if they're surrounded by shitbirds.
Yeah, like what is the saying? You're the sum value of the 4 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah, it's or birds of a feather,
Right.
you know. So it's like you're ultimately, so when we talk about external, we're like, okay, so this manager or this leader with an organization decides to start hanging out with other people in the industry, but they're from a less than ethical,
Right.
They have a less than ethical stance on it, right? It's like insto facto. It doesn't even matter if it's true or not, because everybody's gonna be like, inside the organization is gonna look at it like, can I trust this person anymore?
Right.
Do they really have our values? Are they gonna jump ship? Are they exchanging, trade secrets?
Yeah.
And it's like, and what's this gonna do? And it ultimately turns into a witch hunt.
Right.
I listened to a podcast for a long time now. I've almost finished everything they've put out to this point, which is the Haunted Cosmos.
Yeah.
So you guys rock. I hope you one day hear my voice instead of me just always listening to yours. But anyways, they're talking about the Salem witch trials.
Mm-hmm.
And they did this like 6-part series on the Salem witch trials, and they went
The ultimate bandwagoning.
real in depth about, they don't ever actually produce like, here's what actually happened, because
Right.
it's not like, it was in 1692. It's not like you're going to get a true answer to it, but the amount of things that happened through that whole trial where people were like, 20 different people were hanged in the course of this
Right.
whole thing. And some of them only because they had a relationship
Right.
with, like, in whatever form or fashion. Maybe they're just nice to them,
Right.
and because they were nice to this outcast within the the city or town or whatever, now they're burned at a stake or hung in a tree, like, but that's an extreme example.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it does the same thing for you. So, like, as an owner of an organization, I purposefully will research when people want to connect in some way. Right. Like, so people try to sell us their services, or people want to connect in, chamber of commerce types of things, and they want to joint venture marketing or certain things like that. It's like, I need to know more about your business. I need to know more about you. I need to know more about your character, because I don't want your actions or your errors. People are fallible. Humans are fallible. I'm not perfect, but I don't want to be associated with your imperfections.
Right.
If they're something I can't keep,
Yeah.
above the board.
And I think that, it's important to notate internally is having a diplomatic approach and understanding, like where you were talking about clicks, developing things like that, is understanding if there's a motive and what the motive is, right? And then being able to put a kibosh on that motive, right? Or the formation of a clique, right? Like I very purposefully send the manager under me specifically to spend certain time with a rotation of people at all times, right? So that they don't feel like there's any sort of developed favoritism, right? Or any sort of developed, well, this person, it's not necessarily nepotism, but, I guess I don't know it would just be favoritism, right? Of like, this person gets more attention than this person, and you like this person more than me, so now I'm gonna like you less.
Well, it also puts a lens on them too, because it's like they're going to look at everything from that mischievous or I don't know what the word would be, but like unfair,
Right.
perception.
Right.
It's like, or maybe I just gave them that lead because it was their turn for a new lead. It doesn't need to be a witch hunt.
Right.
But that's the ultimate. So when we actually talk about the management perspective of this particular one, if a manager is not doing everything within their power to avoid their team members becoming cliquey,
Right.
then there's going to be separation, and there's going to be people marching to two different drum beats.
Yep.
Right. And so you're going to have some performers, you're going to have some people who hate the performers.
Yep.
And you have some people who don't care because they don't want to be a part of the drama, and it's just going to be non-cohesive and non-productive. Whereas as a manager, that has even more devastating effects to the organization if that person's part of one of those crowds.
Yeah, I think that it's. I always just try to look at it like I'm going to remain always net neutral. Right.
Pragmatic.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Just look at the facts for what they are, and manage based off that, and try to limit my management based off personality.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, let's just be real. They say you should never blend business and business and personal, right? But how much time do you spend at work?
Yeah, I mean, like 35% of your life.
Right, it's like 30 something percent of your life, and one of the other thirds is sleeping.
Right.
Right. So it's equivalent to your personal life.
Right.
Right. So it's like you are going to develop friendships. You're going to develop irritation and like not going to like certain people. But the way that I view it is you put the uniform on,
right,
and you play the game. Right. And I've used this analogy in a lot of management meetings and stuff like that. I've been, I remember I was elected captain of one of my football teams in high school, and I hated the co-captain.
Right.
I thought he was the worst human on the planet. Right. And that's just probably just a product of the fact that I grew up with him from 3rd grade through 12th grade, and we just didn't like each other, whatever. But we worked fantastic as a tandem co-captain dynamic and team, because we knew what our goal was.
Yeah, the same goal.
Right? Our goal was to win. And it wasn't just to win this game, it was to win the championship. No, we didn't win the championship, so it must not have been that great. I don't know. But either way, we worked really well together because we knew what the goal was. And I think that might be one of the, when I say, let's be real, and, there's never going to be a perfect separation between business and personal.
Right.
But if you understand while you're doing business that this is how we're to conduct ourselves, and outside of this, we're to remain as completely separated from that as possible. Some of our guys do that really well. When the jersey's off, they're friends with other people, and they don't talk about work because they don't want to. They've already done enough talking about work. 33% of their life that they spent talking about work. But some people are really not, and we have to find ways to either separate ourselves from that or influence the thinking. Go back to the error number 3, and make sure that their thinking when they are blending the lines is about progression and forward movement for themselves and the company.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The betterment of the team, as you put it, right? The betterment of the overall outcome, or achieving the result that we want to achieve, which, proverbially we'll say is roofing championships.
Right. Right.
The goal, in my opinion, would to always win best in city year after year after year after year.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, everybody has to be working synchronistically.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good stopping point for today.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you guys get something from this, and understand the importance of allowing people to think freely for themselves, and then don't join the wrong crowd.
Yeah.
My favorite saying is, no matter what group you're with, you hang out in a barbershop long enough, you're going to get a haircut. Right?
Yeah.
So, but that's, the par on course of the same statements of birds of a feather flock together, and, you're the summation of the 5 people you're around the most. So
Exactly. So
surround yourself with winners.
Don't join the wrong crowd. And and just to put another bullet point on top of what you're saying, I think that the true key to success in an organization is by providing enough room for people to fall and learn from their failures. Right. Influence critical thinking, influence autonomy, allow people to work their job and be a human,
Mm-hmm.
and you get a lot better results than if you're just up people's asses all the time.
Right. So don't be up people's asses.
All right. So that's it for this episode. We'll see you next week. on Into the Lion's Den.
Go over 5 and 6. Thank you.